They studied Earth for 11 years, and they found one weakness. 71% of the planet was water. Nothing in that water carried a weapon, so the Vareth Ascendancy did not invade the land. They invaded the ocean. 6 days later, their entire fleet was running. They were not chased by a navy, they were chased by a song. If you enjoy stories where humanity does not win with guns, but with something far stranger, then hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment telling me what you think the aliens heard down there. Share this one with a friend who loves the ocean. Now let us go down into the dark and find out exactly what was waiting. The Vareth Ascendancy did not lose wars, they avoided them. Their entire doctrine was built on one simple idea: do not fight for the ground that is defended. Take the ground that nobody is guarding, plant a claim beacon, and let the locals argue about it afterward. It had worked on 19 worlds. It had never once failed. So when the survey division finished its long study of Earth, the conclusion looked obvious. The humans had built everything on land. Cities, roads, power stations, weapons, satellites, all of it packed onto 29% of the surface. The rest of the planet was water. Deep, cold, empty water with no buildings in it, no borders drawn on it, and no army standing in it. The final report ran to 41,000 pages. 39,000 of those pages were about land. The ocean got one appendix. The appendix said this: large, uniform liquid feature, consistent composition, no structures detected. No defensive assets. Recommend immediate claim. There was a reason for that, and it is worth understanding because everything that happened later grew out of it. The Ascendancy had mapped Earth from orbit using surface reflection. It is a fast method. It is also a shallow one. It reads the top of the water and assumes the rest is the same all the way down. So the Vareth had, in a very literal sense, surveyed the first 30 feet of the ocean and filed a report on all of it. They did not know that the average depth was over 12,000 feet. They did not know that there were trenches that went down nearly 36,000. They did not know that humans had only ever mapped a small fraction of their own seafloor in real detail. The humans did not know what was down there either. The difference was that the humans knew that they did not know. The Vareth thought they had a complete file. Sub-Marshal Torval was given the mission because he was the safest officer in the fleet. 47 years of service, 9 claim operations, 0 casualties on any of them. He was not a hero. He was a man who read the paperwork twice and then read it a third time. He had a favorite sentence, and he used it constantly: if we are surprised, someone did not do their job. His ship was called the Deep Claim. It carried a crew of 6. Pesk was second officer, and Pesk loved regulations the way other people love music. He carried a personal record of every procedural violation he had ever witnessed. It was, at that point, 412 pages long. Gren was chief engineer, and Gren had one belief that he repeated like a prayer: any environment can be sealed, any environment. Delvo was the scout, young, restless, the only one on board who had ever asked to be assigned to a water world. Yannick ran the sensors, and Yannick was quiet, careful, and slower to speak than anyone liked, because he never said anything until he was certain. And Rook was the heavy trooper, 7 feet of armored confidence, who had personally ended a rebellion on a moon by walking into the room. The Deep Claim entered Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday, at 3 in the morning local time, 300 miles west of the California coast. It entered the water without a splash because it was built to. It began its descent. At 200 feet, everything was fine. At 600 feet, the hull made a noise. Gren looked up from his station. It was a slow, deep groan, like a door in an old house, except the door was made of alloy plating and it was 22 feet thick. Torval kept his voice flat. Report. External pressure is rising faster than the model predicted, Gren said. By how much? Gren checked the readout twice before he answered. Sir, the model said we would reach maximum rated pressure at 11,000 feet. And we are at 640. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Pesk quietly opened a new page in his record. 300 miles away, on the surface, a very different kind of vessel was going about a very ordinary night. The Sea Wren was a 58-foot research boat out of Monterey, and it had seen better decades. The hull was patched. The galley smelled permanently of burnt coffee. The engine had a personality, and the personality was bad. Walt Brenner ran it. He was 61 years old, a retired Navy sonar chief, and he had a face that made insurance agents nervous. He spoke in short sentences. He drank coffee that could strip paint. He had spent 30 years listening to the ocean, and he had long ago stopped being impressed by anything on the surface of it. Dr. Nora Whitfield ran the science. She was 54, and she had been chasing the same animal for 22 years. Casey Doyle was the graduate student, 26, and he recorded absolutely everything, on the theory that one day something would happen and he would be the only one who caught it. And Hank Mueller kept the engine alive with duct tape, spite, and a set of tools he refused to let anyone else touch. That night, Nora sat in the dark with her headphones on, listening to the hydrophone line the way she had listened for 2 decades. And out of the deep, right on schedule, came a sound. It was low. It was long, it rose and it fell, and then it faded, and then 40 seconds later it came again. Casey leaned in. "Is that her?" "That is her," Nora said. The animal was a blue whale. She was 98 feet long. She weighed close to 190 tons, which made her, as far as anyone could prove, the largest kind of animal that had ever existed on Earth. Her heart alone was the size of a small car. Her call could reach 188 decibels, which made it the loudest sustained sound any living creature on the planet could produce. The crew called her Doris, because in the first year Walt had said she sounded like his Aunt Doris calling everybody in for dinner, and the name had stuck the way bad names always do. And there was one more thing about Doris, and it was the thing that had kept Nora at sea for 22 years. Blue whales sing low. Most of them sit between 10 and 40 hertz, far below what a human ear can catch without help. Doris sang at 52. It was too high. It was in the wrong band. It was, to every other blue whale in that ocean, a voice speaking a language that nobody around her used. In 22 years of recordings across thousands of hours, Doris had called and called and called. Nothing had ever answered. Nora pulled the headphones down and rubbed her eyes. Same as always. Same as always, Walt said. 4,000 feet below them in a ship that was already groaning, Yannick finally spoke. "Sir," he said, "I have a sound." Torval did not look up. The ocean is full of sound. "No, sir," Yannick said. "This one repeats. Same interval, same structure, every 40 seconds. That got Torval's attention. He turned. "How long has it been repeating?" Yannick ran the pattern back through the archive. Then he ran it again because he did not say anything until he was certain. "Sir," he said slowly. "Based on the residual acoustic record in this basin, this signal has been broadcasting on the same frequency, from the same source for approximately 22 years. Pesk looked up from his page. And Torval, who had not been surprised in 19 years, felt something cold move through him. Because in Varath doctrine, there was only one thing that repeated on a fixed interval, on a fixed frequency, for decades in a place with no cities. A beacon. Torval ordered the descent to continue. That was his first mistake, and it was a reasonable one. The logic was sound. If something was broadcasting down there, then the ascendancy needed to know what it was before it planted a claim. You do not put your flag on ground that already has a signal fire burning on it. So the deep claim went down. At 3,000 feet, the temperature outside dropped to 38 degrees. At 5,000, the last of the light was gone, and the readout stopped reporting a surface at all. At 8,000 feet, the pressure outside the hull passed 3,500 pounds on every square inch. For comparison, the crew compartment held a steady 15. The wall between those two numbers was doing a great deal of quiet work. Gren stood in the engineering bay with his hand flat against the plating, feeling it move. "It is not leaking," he reported. "It is flexing. Is that acceptable?" Torval asked. Gren considered the question honestly. "Sir, on any other world I would call it a structural failure in progress. Here I think it might just be Tuesday." They reached the seafloor at 11,400 feet and settled into soft sediment, and for about 6 hours the mission looked like it was working. Then the salt started. Nobody had briefed them on salt. The appendix had described the water as a uniform liquid feature, which is technically true in the same way that a hurricane is technically weather. What the appendix had not mentioned was that seawater is one of the most patiently destructive substances in the known galaxy. It does not attack. It does not need to. It simply sits against a metal surface and waits, and it has all the time in the world. By hour 9, the external sensor housings had gone dull. By hour 14, 2 of them had gone soft. By hour 20, Gren had to admit out loud in front of everyone that the hull was being eaten. Any environment can be sealed, Rook said helpfully. Gren did not respond to that. He simply wrote something down. At hour 31, the hull grew a beard. This is not an exaggeration. Larval barnacles and tube worms in the water column will attach to any hard surface that sits still long enough, and the deep claim had sat still for a day and a half. When Delvo took a scout pod out to inspect the exterior, he came back and reported that the ship was, in his words, becoming a reef. Torval went out to see it himself. He looked at his warship. His warship looked back at him, covered in a thin crust of small living things that had already decided this was home. Pesk stood beside him and said, "Quietly, sir, are we being colonized?" "Do not put that in the record," Torval said. Pesk put it in the record. Then came the hagfish, and the hagfish were worse. The Pacific hagfish is a real animal, and it is one of the most spectacularly effective creatures Earth has ever produced. It is eel-shaped. It is nearly blind. It has no jaw worth mentioning. And when something threatens it, it releases a protein that hits seawater and expands, instantly, into a mass of thick slime. One hagfish can turn a bucket of water into a bucket of slime in seconds. Rook found this out first. He was on an exterior maintenance run, clearing growth off the intake vents, and he reached into a gap and something moved. The squad link recorded the entire exchange, and Pesk preserved it forever. "Contact," Rook said. "Describe it," Torval said. "It is soft." "Rook, it is very soft, sir." Then the hagfish did what hagfish do. Rook's armor gloves filled. His arm seals filled. Then the intake vent he had been cleaning filled, which was worse, because the vent led to the primary coolant loop. And within 90 seconds, the deep claim's cooling system had been shut down by an animal with no bones. They got him back inside. It took Gren 4 hours to purge the line. Rook stood in the decontamination bay in complete silence for most of it. At the end, he said one sentence. "I have led boarding actions on 3 worlds, and that is the first time I have been beaten by something that did not have a plan." Delvo, meanwhile, was having the opposite experience. Delvo had asked for this posting. Delvo had spent his cadet years reading about water worlds and being told they were boring. And now he was piloting a scout pod through the dark with a lamp on, and every single hour he found something that was not in the file. He found a fish that made its own light. He found a field of tube worms living beside a hot vent in water that should have killed them. He found, on a shallow run near the Channel Islands, a small striped creature about 7 inches long that watched his pod approach, considered it, and then struck the viewport with one limb. The pod's forward viewport was rated for 11,000 feet of pressure. It cracked. Delvo sat there, absolutely still, staring at a hairline fracture and then at the animal, which had not moved and did not appear even slightly concerned. He reported it exactly as he saw it. "Command, I have been attacked by something the size of my hand, and it damaged rated pressure glass." Yannick ran the identification. "Mantis shrimp," he said, "local species. The strike is faster than a rifle round. It boils the water around the impact point." There was a long pause on the link. Torval finally spoke. "Say that last part again. It boils the water, sir." "Very briefly. The strike moves so fast that the water cannot get out of the way." Torval looked slowly around his bridge, at his corroding hull, at his colonized plating, at his coolant loop that had been defeated by slime. He said, "What is the threat rating on that animal in the file?" Yannick checked. "Sir," he said, "the file does not list it. The file does not list any of them. The file describes this entire ocean as a uniform liquid feature." And that was the moment Sub-Marshal Torval understood, for the first time, that his 41,000-page report was, in every way that mattered, blank. He was still holding that thought when Yannick straightened up sharply. "Sir, the 52 Hz signal has changed." "Changed how?" "It is getting louder," Yannick said. "Which means it is not a fixed beacon at all." He turned around. "Sir, it is moving, and it is coming toward us." Up on the surface, the humans were having a strange week too, but they were interpreting it very differently. It started when Casey Doyle noticed that the hydrophone line was picking up a hum that had no business being there. It was mechanical. It was steady. It was in a band that no biological source produces. He brought it to Walt. Walt listened to it for about 11 seconds, which for Walt was a long and careful analysis. "Sub," he said. Nora frowned. "Whose?" Walt shrugged. "Not my business anymore. That is one of the underrated facts about the ocean. It is enormous, and it is loud, and it is already full of things nobody has explained." Back in 1997, real ocean listening stations recorded a sound so loud and so strange that it got its own name and years of speculation before scientists finally traced it to ice cracking in the Antarctic. The sea has always produced mysteries. People who work on it stop panicking about them early, or they find another job. So the crew of the Sea Wren logged the hum, filed it, and went back to work because they had a much more interesting problem. Doris had changed her route. For 22 years she had followed the same broad path through that basin. Now she was tracking west and down, steadily, toward deep water, and she was calling more often. Not louder, more often. Nora sat with the recording running and her hands flat on the table. "She is looking for something," she said. "She is always looking for something," Walt said. "No," Nora shook her head. 22 years, the same call, the same interval, nothing back. This is different. She is calling like she thinks she is going to get an answer. 11,000 feet under them, the Vareth were preparing for war with an ocean that had not noticed them. Torval did what a competent officer does. He assumed the moving signal was an escort or a patrol vessel, and he ordered a defensive posture. Sensors up, weapons warm, scout pod recalled. And then, before the moving signal ever arrived, the ocean sent everything else first. The Humboldt squid came at hour 50. They are real, they live in that water, and fishermen off California have a name for them that translates roughly to red devils. They travel in groups that can number in the thousands. They are curious in a way that is not comforting. They change color when they are excited, flashing red and white down the length of their bodies, and nobody is completely certain what the flashing means. They found the scout pod on its way home and decided to investigate it. Delvo's report was calm for about 40 seconds. "Command, I have contacts. Numerous, how numerous?" "I am going to say 2,000. Say again, I am revising to 3,000. They did not attack the pod exactly. That is what made it so unsettling. They surrounded it. They pressed against it. They flashed red, and then white, and then red again in waves, thousands of them at once, until the entire darkness around the pod was pulsing like something enormous breathing. Delvo, being Delvo, did not panic. He recorded it. He sat inside a small metal shell at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by a flashing wall of animals, and what he said on the open link was this: "Command, I want to state for the record that this is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Pesk wrote that down as a mental fitness concern. Then the orcas came, and the orcas were personal. Here is a real thing that happened on Earth, and it is worth knowing because the Vareth learned it the hard way. Off the coast of Spain in recent years, groups of orcas began approaching boats and deliberately taking apart their rudders. Not the hulls, not the crews, the rudders, specifically, repeatedly. Nobody has fully explained why. The leading theory is that at some point one of them figured out it was interesting and the rest learned it from her. Orcas do that. They pass things along. A group of 6 found the deep claim stabilizer fins on hour 58. Gren watched the strain numbers climb and could not process what he was reading. "Sir, they are not trying to breach us." "Then what are they doing?" "They are testing which parts come off." Torval went to the observation bay and looked out, and he saw a black and white animal roughly 25 feet long hanging in the water about 9 feet away, upside down, looking directly back at him. It rolled, it considered him, then it went back to the fin. Sub-Marshal Torval, veteran of 9 claim operations, said out loud to nobody, "They are learning us." Then at hour 61, the sperm whale arrived, and that one nearly ended the mission on the spot. The sperm whale is the largest toothed predator on Earth, and it hunts in total darkness using sound. The clicks it produces to find prey have been measured at over 230 decibels. That is the loudest sound any animal on this planet is known to make. It is a pulse of pure pressure, aimed like a beam. The whale swept the deep claim the way any hunter sweeps an unfamiliar object. It clicked once. Every external sensor on the Vareth ship went blind. Yannick came out of his seat. Sir, we have lost the array. Damage, not damaged, sir. Saturated. The signal exceeded our maximum input by a wide margin. Torval stood in a dark bridge on the floor of the Pacific Ocean, and he did the math that every commander eventually has to do. His hull was corroding. His plating was growing animals. His coolant had been shut down by slime. His pressure glass had been cracked by something the size of a hand. His fins were being disassembled by a group that thought it was interesting. And his sensors had just been switched off by a single click from an animal that was not even hunting him. And none of it was the thing that was actually coming. Yannick got partial function back 9 minutes later. When he did, he went very still. Sir, report. Yannick's voice was flat and careful, the way it always was when he was certain. The 52 Hertz source is at 1100 meters and rising toward us. I have a mass estimate now. Give it to me. 189 tons. Nobody moved, Sir. Yannick said. That is heavier than this ship. The bridge of the deep claim went very quiet. 189 tons, rising. 1100 meters out and closing at a steady, unhurried pace, the pace of something that was not in a rush because it had never in its life needed to be. Torval kept his voice level. Weapons. Warm, Sir. Rook said. Then keep them warm and keep them pointed at nothing, Torval said. We do not fire on an unidentified asset until we know what it is. Pesk stood up. Sir, he said. Regulation. Torval closed his eyes for 1 second. Say it. Ascendancy Standing Order 4, Pesk recited, and he did not need the page. When a fixed frequency signal is detected in a claim zone, the claiming vessel shall transmit the recognition sequence on the matching frequency before any engagement, so that friendly assets are not fired upon in error. Yannick turned slowly in his seat. Gren put down the tool he was holding. Torval looked at his second officer for a long moment. Pesk, he said, that regulation was written for orbital beacons. It does not say orbital, sir. It says beacon. Pesk did not blink. It says fixed frequency signal, sir. This signal has been on the same frequency for 22 years. I would be required to log a violation, and there it was. 19 years without a surprise, 9 clean claim operations, 47 years of doing everything correctly. And the thing that finally cracked Sub-Marshal Torval's career open was not a weapon or a fleet or a mistake. It was a man with a very good memory and a 412-page notebook. Transmit the sequence, Torval said. Yannick hesitated. Sir, if this is a hostile asset, we are about to tell it exactly where we are. If it is at 1100 meters and it already knows our mass, Torval said, then it knows where we are. Transmit. So they did. At 11,400 feet below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, the Vareth Ascendancy warship Deep Claim broadcast a formal recognition sequence at 52 Hertz. It was 11 seconds long. It was the standard tone pattern used across 19 conquered systems. It meant in the plainest possible terms, we are here, we see you, respond. Then they waited. Nothing happened for 34 seconds. Then something answered. It came in low and it came in enormous, and it did not sound like a machine and it did not sound like a code. It rose and it held and it fell away, and the whole hull of the Deep Claim hummed faintly along with it, the way a window hums when a truck goes past. Yannick stared at his readout. Sir. Response received, content. Yannick ran it through everything he had. Then he ran it again because he never said anything until he was certain. Sir, he said, there is no content, it is not code. There is no structure, no repetition pattern, no data layer. It is one continuous tone. Then what is it? Yannick looked up. Sir, I believe it is a voice. 300 and some miles away, and 11,000 feet up. Casey Doyle was in the wet lab with the hydrophone feed running when he heard the 11-second tone. He sat up so fast he knocked his coffee onto the floor and did not notice. Dr. Whitfield, he said. Dr. Whitfield. Nora came in still pulling her jacket on. What? Casey did not answer. He just handed her the headphones and rolled the recording back. She listened to the tone. 11 seconds, 52 hertz, flat, even mechanical, absolutely nothing like an animal. Then she listened to what came 34 seconds after it. Doris, answering. Nora took the headphones off very slowly and set them down on the table like they might break. Play it again, she said. Casey played it again. Walt came in from the wheelhouse, looked at both of them, and read the room in about 2 seconds. What? Nora's hands were shaking, and she was a woman who had spent 22 years learning not to get excited about anything. "Walt," she said. Something answered her. Down in the dark, the Vareth were having a considerably worse conversation, because Doris had not answered once. She had answered, and then she had answered again, and the interval between her calls was shrinking. 40 seconds became 30, 30 became 22, and she was still rising. Yannick tracked her steadily. 900 meters, 600, 400. Sir Gren said from engineering, and there was something new in his voice. The plating is responding. Responding how? It is moving with the sound. Torval crossed to the observation bay. Delvo was already there, both hands flat against the inner frame, staring out into water that was as black as anything he had ever seen. "Delvo, get to your post." "Sir," Delvo said quietly, "in about 40 seconds you are going to want to be standing right here." The lamps were on. They reached maybe 60 feet into the dark, and beyond that the ocean simply stopped existing. Then the dark moved, not a shape, not at first. Just the sense that the blackness 60 feet out had gotten closer without anything actually crossing the distance. Then a flank slid into the light. It was pale gray, mottled, and it kept going. It went past the observation bay, and it kept going. It went past the forward lamp array, and it kept going. It went past the corroded sensor housings, past the plating with barnacles on it, past the stripped stabilizer fin, and it kept going. Nobody on the bridge said a word. Pesk had his notebook open and had not written anything in it. The deep claim was 162 feet long. She was 98, and she went past them for what felt like a very long time. And when the tail finally cleared the lamps, it moved once, slow and enormous. And the entire ship rolled 9 degrees to port and settled back. Rook, who had ended a rebellion by walking into a room, said in a very small voice, "Sir, is that one animal?" "Yes," Torval said. "There is no braced section on it. There is no plating. It is not wearing anything. No, Rook processed this. Sir, it is not armored, and it is heavier than we are." Then Doris turned, came back around, settled herself in the water about 40 feet off their port flank, and began to sing. And this time she did not stop. The first thing that failed was the ceramic in the coolant manifold, and it failed at hour 66, 9 minutes into the song. Gren did not understand it at first. There was no impact. There was no breach. The pressure had not changed. He stood in his own engine bay with a fractured manifold in front of him and no explanation for it at all. Then he put his hand on the bulkhead and he understood, and he went cold. He got Torval on the link. "Sir, I need you to listen to me carefully because I am going to say something that is going to sound wrong." "Say it." "She is not hitting us," Gren said. "She is holding a note against us." "Explain." Gren pulled up every structural number he had. "Sir, every object has a frequency where it wants to move. You push a hanging weight at the right rhythm and it swings higher and higher even though you are barely pushing. It is not force, it is timing," Torval said, and "Sir, our hull is a hollow alloy shell, 240 feet of it, sitting in dense salt water at 11,000 feet. Under those conditions, our plating wants to move at somewhere between 48 and 56 hertz. Torval closed his eyes. "She is at 52, Gren said. "She has been at 52 for 22 years. And she is putting out 188 decibels of it from 40 feet away. And she is not stopping to breathe as often as she should. And every wave she sends into us arrives exactly when the last one is still moving." "How long?" Torval said. "I do not know, sir. 2 hours, 6 hours, however long our worst weld holds. Then break the resonance. Move us. We are trying, sir, but she moves when we move." That was the part that nobody on that ship was ready for. Doris was not attacking. There is no evidence that she had any idea what the object beside her actually was. What she had was a very simple fact that had been true her entire life, and had just, for the first time, stopped being true. She had called at 52 hertz for 22 years and nothing had ever answered. Something had answered, and now she was not going to let it out of her sight. The deep claim lifted off the seafloor and moved 400 meters east. She followed and settled back in beside them and sang. They moved 1,200 meters north. She followed and sang. Gren rerouted power and pushed them 900 meters up. She surfaced, breathed, came back down, took her position, and sang. "Sir, Yannick reported at hour 69 we have a new problem." Torval had stopped asking what. Blue whale calls at this frequency travel a very long way in this basin, Yannick said. Hers has been going out at full volume for 3 hours. And I have 4 more mass returns inbound, sir, between 100 and 170 tons each, range approximately 90 kilometers and closing. By hour 73, there were 7 of them. They did not attack either. That was somehow worse. They circled, slow and curious, an animal the length of the ship passing overhead every few minutes, and the sound in the water stopped being one voice and became a chord. And the entire deep claim rang like a struck bell that nobody was allowed to stop. The orcas came back and took the second stabilizer fin off entirely, apparently because the first one had gone so well. 2 sperm whales arrived at hour 74 and swept the ship with a single hunting click each, out of what appeared to be professional curiosity, and blinded the array again. The hagfish at some point got into the secondary intake. Nobody even reported that one. At hour 76, Pesk came onto the bridge holding his notebook, and his hands were not steady. Sir, he said, I have to log something. Log it. I have 412 pages of procedural violations, Pesk said, across 9 claim operations. I have never once had to log a violation that had no responsible party. What are you logging, Pesk? Pesk looked at the deck. Sir, understanding Order 4, I am required to record who initiated hostile contact. And nobody did, Pesk said. Sir, nobody down here is at war with us. The animal that is destroying this ship is not aware that it is destroying this ship. She is not attacking. She is talking. We answered a stranger, and now she will not leave, and I do not have a form for that. Torval looked at him for a long moment. Then he made the decision that ended his career and saved his crew. Emergency ascent, he said. Full power. Now, Gren did not argue, Rook did not argue, Yannick did not argue. Delvo said, sir, and Torval turned on him hard. Say one word about how beautiful it is, and I will leave you here. Delvo said, sir, I was going to say thank you for letting me see it. The deep claim came up out of 11,400 feet at a rate that its own manual described as a structural emergency. It shed plating on the way. It lost the last of its sensor housings at 4,000 feet. It broke the surface 300 miles west of California at 11 minutes past 4 in the morning, trailing barnacles, missing both fins, leaking coolant, and screaming a distressed tone on every band it had left. The 3 ascendancy vessels holding position beyond the moon received that transmission at once. They also received the acoustic recording attached to it, because Yannick attached everything always out of habit. The fleet analyst on the lead ship listened to 7 blue whales in chorus, 2 sperm whale hunting pulses, and 1 continuous 52 Hz tone that had brought down a claim vessel from 40 feet away without touching it. They did not identify it as biology. Nothing in their doctrine allowed for biology at that scale. They classified it as a coordinated deep-water defense grid, active, unmapped, and enormous. And the Vareth Ascendancy, which had never once fought a war it could avoid, turned around and ran from Earth without ever landing a single soldier on it. Sub-Marshal Torval got exactly one thing out of that retreat, and it was the only thing he ever wanted. 6 crew went down, 6 crew came back. He was going to have to explain the rest of it to a council that had not been down there. The hearing took 9 hours. Sub-Marshal Torval stood in front of the Ascendancy High Council with his service record on the table, a hull that was being scrapped in the yard behind him, and a single barnacle shell in his pocket that he had not been able to make himself throw away. The council started where councils always start. Were you engaged by a military force? No. By a defense platform? No. By an armed vessel of any kind? No, Torval said. Then explain to this council, said the senior counselor, how a claim vessel of the Ascendancy was destroyed at the bottom of an ocean by an unarmed world. Torval had spent the entire flight home writing that answer, and in the end he did not use any of it. Sir, he said, we surveyed the top 30 feet of that ocean and wrote a report about all of it. We described the largest habitat on that planet as a uniform liquid feature. We sent 6 people into 12,000 feet of water with a file that had 1 appendix in it. The chamber was silent. We were not defeated, Torval said. We were corrected. He put the recordings into the chamber and he let them run. The council heard a coolant loop shut down by an animal with no bones. They heard a scout report a cracked pressure viewport and a strike that boiled water. They heard a heavy trooper say, out loud, that he had been beaten by something that did not have a plan. They heard 6 orcas take a stabilizer fin apart, because one of them found it interesting and the others learned it from her. And then the council heard 11 seconds of a Vareth recognition sequence, followed by 34 seconds of silence, followed by a voice. Nobody in that chamber spoke for a long time after it ended. One counselor finally said, "What was it?" "The largest animal that has ever existed on that world," Torval said. "Approximately 190 tons. It carried no weapon, it had no shell, it was not defending anything. Then why did it destroy your ship?" And here Torval said the sentence that ended up in the permanent record and got quoted in ascendancy academies for a very long time afterward. "Because we spoke to it," he said. And it had been calling for 22 years, and nothing had ever called back. "Counselors, we did not find a weapon down there. We found something lonely and we answered it and it would not let us go. The classification came down 2 days later. Planetary target Earth, zone, all marine regions. Invasion status permanently withdrawn. Threat category uncharted biological scale. Primary hazards as listed, corrosive water. Pressure exceeding hull rating at 9% of surveyed depth. Adhesive marine organisms. Structural resonance from sustained biological tone. Acoustic saturation from unarmed native species. Coordinated tool learning in non-industrial animals. Slime. Operational note, appended by Pesk, who had been promoted for reasons he still did not understand. Do not transmit on any fixed frequency detected below the surface of that world. The signal is not a beacon. It is a question, do not answer it. Final line of the file added by Torval himself. Update the survey doctrine. 29% of a world is not a world. On the Sea Wren, 300 miles off the California coast, Nora Whitfield spent the next 11 months trying to publish what she had. She had 11 seconds of a 52 Hz tone with no biological signature, followed by a response from an animal she had tracked for 22 years. She had Casey's recordings, all of them, every hour, because Casey recorded everything on the theory that one day something would happen. The reviewers were polite. The reviewers said equipment artifact. The reviewers said an unusual ship transmission. The reviewers said interesting, and then they said no. Walt Brenner read the 3rd rejection letter over her shoulder, drank some of his terrible coffee, and said the only thing that ever really helped. They were not out there listening, he said. You were. If this one got you, then leave a comment and tell me what you think Doris was actually saying, because I read every single one of them. And share this with somebody who thinks the ocean is empty. It is not. We have only ever mapped a fraction of the bottom of our own planet, and the biggest animal that has ever lived is still down there, singing on a frequency nobody else uses. Nora never proved it. She stopped trying eventually and went back to doing the work, but she kept the line in the water. And that is where the story would have ended, except for one detail that nobody on Earth has ever known. The ascendancy did not fully leave. They kept one small, unarmed listening vessel parked out past the orbit of Mars, because doctrine required a monitor on any world classified as permanently withdrawn. It was a boring post. Nobody wanted it. Delvo requested it 3 times before they gave it to him. He is still out there. He watches an ocean he is not allowed to enter, on a world he is not allowed to touch, and once a year on the anniversary of a very bad Tuesday. He does something that is technically a violation of Standing Order 4. He transmits 11 seconds at 52 Hz. He does not send a code. There is no content in it. He just sends the tone, and then he waits, and about 34 seconds later, from 11,000 feet down in the dark, something enormous and gray and impossibly old answers him. Down on the water once a year, an old research boat picks it up. Nora does not know what it is. She has stopped guessing. She just sits in the dark with the headphones on and marks the date and listens to a conversation between 2 things that have never met, in a language neither one of them understands. And every year without fail, she writes the same 3 words in the log. She got answered.